Are you ready to take your personal development to the next level? My podcast guest today is Will Polston, and we cover all things personal development. Will share some really important insights from his book, North Star Thinking, and we talk about a range of topics like values and motivations. And Will shares his experience and his insights around things like goal setting and our purpose, and the language that we use when we talk about what it is that we want or what it is that we're doing at the moment. So I really hope you enjoy today's episode. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and let me know what you think in the comments. Will, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I know we've been talking about doing this recording for a while, so I'm so delighted to have you as my guest. Do you want to let listeners know a little bit about your background and what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, from the moment I was in the womb, I knew I wanted to be a coach. No, absolute, not true whatsoever. Not true whatsoever. So yeah, so the short version, I suppose, of kind of where I was at was I grew up with a belief that money equaled happiness. And I went off on a tangent to make as much money as I could as early as I could and become pretty good at that. As part of that process, I stumbled across personal development. The more personal development I did, the more money I made. And then that just went on for some years. And then 11 years ago, I went to an event and had what I call my lightning moment, which was a life-changing moment. It cried my eyes out for about 15 minutes because in that moment, I realized my real driver was nothing to do with money. It had never really been about money. What it was really about was my dad and how my dad hadn't achieved certain things he was capable of and the impact that had on him and my mum and me and my family and a whole host of other people. And I just vowed from that moment, I don't want anyone else to have to go through the suffering that he went through and we went through as a result of them not achieving their full potential. So from that moment on, I've just been obsessed with anything to do with human awareness, human potential, human behavior to enable people to achieve what it is they're capable of. Been in the sort of coaching space now for 8 or 9 years, and yeah, I'm an obsessive learner and like taking complex things, simplifying them down, and then that led to my book, North Star Thinking, Master Your Mind, Set and Live a Life You Love, coming out, which is sort of a condensation of all of those elements to kind of give people a bit of an insight.
Mm. I think the first thing, Will, that strikes me is the idea that you got into personal development, but it was kind of to your own gain. Let's say you were like, oh, I'm going to focus on this. Oh, this is making me more money, and just going straight for the money. And I think a lot of people go through that journey. They're like, oh, this actually works. But then you realize, well, what am I really here for? And what is
Mm.
here beyond money? I love that as a driver, that you could see that your dad wasn't reaching his potential, and that had an impact on so many other people, in your life, especially. And I suppose for me, I got into personal development maybe 10 or 11 years ago and eased myself in gently, learning more and more about what's going on. And a big thing that I found is you can know all of this stuff, but any thoughts on how to apply it? So you can read all of these books and know what it is that you're supposed to be doing, but any thoughts on like, well, how do we move from the knowing into the actually applying and doing?
Yeah, I suppose the starting point is very simple. Has the gap closed? Because you can learn lots of things and you can
Mm,
become more knowledgeable, but knowledge without action is like, what's the point? So
yeah.
what's the action? And if that gap isn't closing, then learning more is not gonna help. I talk about knowledge, action, knowledge, action, knowledge, action, knowledge, action. And so many people that go knowledge, 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 and they've got all of these things. And what happens
Yeah.
is the more that you learn, the more of an imposter you would become because like
Mm,
you haven't actually taken action on what happens. I mean, I remember working with a guy 7 years or so ago now, and he was a property investor. He'd spent £42,000 over a 5 year period on his property education
mm.
and did nothing. I had no property in 5 years because he was well,
Wow.
I need to know more. I'm not good enough yet. I need to learn more. When
Okay.
when I'm ready, and
Yeah.
and we start. That's really what it's about. No matter how small we start. Now that said, um, I was that guy. I was
Mm,
exactly that guy. So, I told you the real short version a moment ago, but what actually happened was I had that big lightning moment. And at the time, I was working in London. I was running a division of a stock brokerage, and then I thought, well, I need to leave, and what I really wanted to do was some sort of coaching. But I thought, I'll do that when I'm successful. I call it when then
Yeah.
syndrome. When this happens, then that happens. When I'm
Yeah.
successful. So I left that and I set up a renewable energy business, and we grew that, and it was growing rapidly, and we we had 85 staff, growing, and then bang, government changed legislation, killed that business overnight. And I went on holiday at the time, and it just dawned on me, Will, you're just chasing the money again. Like,
Mm.
why don't you just start now? And I read a book called The Hero by Rhonda Byrne. A lot of people know she wrote the book The Secret and produced the film The
Yeah.
Secret. And it spoke about a guy called Mastin Kipp. And Mastin used to post a motivational quote on Twitter every day. He had about 1,000 followers. And then one day he got retweeted by Kim Kardashian, and he went from 1,000 followers to 10,000 followers overnight. And I just
Yeah.
started crying. I was like, that's all I need to. I just need to start. If I want to help people, just start, Will.
Yeah.
So I literally come back from that holiday. I started posting a quote a day on social media. After a week, I thought, well, some people don't go on social media in the morning. Post one in the afternoon as well. So I was doing two a day. A week later, I I set up a basic website for myself. A week after that, I wrote my first blog. But that was what went on. 3 months later, I had a 10,000 strong social media following. In the fourth month, I ran my first four events, and it just compounded
Yeah.
from that. But that it didn't come from reading any more books or doing any more courses. It came
Yeah.
from the action
Yeah. Yeah.
of that process.
And I think we delude ourselves. So there's a few things I want to pick up on there. This idea that we have to feel like we're an expert or we have to feel ready before we get started. And the idea is you can start before you're ready. You're never going to feel fully ready. You're always going to see other people who you think are ahead of you. And I'm putting that kind of in air quotes. Um, but there is this imposter type called the expert, and the expert, you'll see them doing courses and programs all the time because they want to stay ahead, and they're consuming content all the time rather than sharing content, rather than putting themselves out there. So I love that as a lesson, that it's you just need to get started wherever you are and keep going. And I think the more you do that, you're probably, and I'm speaking from my own experience rather than kind of making assumptions about you, Will, but you might be replicating maybe what other people are doing to start because you haven't found your own voice yet. But the more you do it, I think the more authentic you get in doing, and the kind of the core of what it is that you want to say really shines through. So I love that as an approach. You also brought up this idea of the when I'm successful, then I can do that. So we're kind of deferring our happiness, we're deferring our perception of ourselves until something happens. That's something that I'm really becoming a lot more interested in recently, because we all have a tendency to do that. I'll be happy when I lose weight, I meet a partner, I insert whatever it is that you want to achieve. I get the new job, I get the promotion, whatever it might be. We always defer our happiness to when sometime in the future, rather than being happy in the present and kind of focusing on the now and enjoying the journey. Much as some people don't like that word, like, oh, it's like going on a journey. It's like you're never going to reach any destination. So the entirety of life is a journey.
Yeah, it's so true. And to answer your point about the starting bit, it was exactly that. I mean, I literally posted quotes of other people
Yeah, so did I. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
every
my
day,
very early
twice a
Instagram
day
posts. Yeah.
for years,
Mm,
years and years. I did it, but it got me started.
yeah.
It got me started, and
Mm,
and it kind of built on. And I think the days of an Instagram post just having a quote of it that doesn't kind of do much anymore, but it did. It enabled me to get going, and I think you're absolutely right. You're better to start than not.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Just get going. And then you start to find your own voice. You start to find your own authenticity, I think, afterwards. I love the name of the book. Can we come back to the book for a second?
Yeah, of
So
course.
this idea of North Star, what does North Star, like, what does that mean to you?
So for me, it's there's a famous story. You probably heard of it. It involves a baby born in December in a stable a couple of thousand years ago. And then with three men, supposedly wise, all carrying presents. And what happened was one day it dawned on me, right, well, there's this famous story, and just for all clarity, I'm not religious, not that I've got anything against other people that are religious, but that's kind of not my stance. But there was just it just the penny drop for me was one of the most famous stories ever told was about these guys that followed this North Star and they achieved their goal, right? And their goal was finding this baby, but they never went to the North Star, or if they did, I never read that part of the story, right? And
Ah, okay. Yeah,
and
yeah,
that for
yeah.
me was what it was really about. Is I had done for myself, spent so long going through like having the when then syndrome, set a short term goal, achieve it, set another one, achieve it, set another one, achieve it. You're just pinballing around. But my whole point of a North Star is having a goal in life that's so big you never achieve it. Why? Because then you can detach from the outcome and you can focus on the process instead.
I just love that as a concept. So, what would you say is your North Star?
To empower people to transform excuses into results and live a life they love.
Yeah. And so that is, and again, this is something I'm becoming increasingly interested in or have become aware of over the last number of years, the idea of it's not about the goals, it's more about the habits. So what are you doing every day to realize that? And therefore you're kind of achieve if you call the habits the goals, you're achieving your goals every day, essentially.
Yeah, I think that any goal that anyone ever sets is to change the way they feel.
Mm,
And the reality of what people need to do, it's like we're human beings, right? And we're not human doings. And I believe that any worthy endeavor evolves you as a person, and it's about who you become as part of that process.
I love that. I love that. And again, it's this process, it's this journey as opposed to finally getting to a destination, finally feeling happy or finally feeling however it is. I think most people, dare I say, that's what they want to feel. They want to feel good emotions. They don't want to wake up and be sad and feel guilty or disappointed or whatever it might be. But I love the concept of your inner driver is to change how you feel. So can you talk to me a little bit about the journey that you took on that? How were you feeling and then how you went about transforming that?
Um, yeah, so a really good question. I think any emotion, negative or positive, is a signal to think or act differently. That's it.
Mm,
And most people aren't aware of that is the role of an emotion. And obviously, with self-awareness and self-reflection, we have an ability to have an understanding of what's really going on. And I I believe that so many people are living their life incongruently,
mm,
and they're living their life incongruently because they haven't been taught another way of living. So if you look at the majority of the population are not living their life. They're living somebody else's life,
mm,
somebody else that had a vision for them, a preconceived idea of what their life should be like, which are essentially other people's values, and a value is a priority. And
mm,
those values were injected or projected into them from an authority figure. That could have been a parent, an aunt, a grandparent. It could have been a school teacher. It could have been society. And
mm,
people are living that way rather than their own way. And it's only when we get truly clear on what it is that we really want, and we take control of how we what our what we truly value, and we live in accordance to that, that we have an ability to live in inspiration. So the difference between inspiration and motivation is external. You'll constantly need external motivation. And one of the ways that I know if people are living their values or somebody else's is from the language they're using. So if they're using language like I have to, I need to, I
mm,
ought to, I should, that's an indication they're living somebody else's values. When they're living their own values, they're using language like I love to, I desire to, I'd yeah, I love to, I want to. Whereas the great thing about that is that when you're in inspiration, it's exactly that, it comes from within,
Mm.
inspiration, in spirit. What's another word for
Mm.
spirit? Energy. You're in your energy. So people think they burn out because they're working too hard. They don't. They burn out because they're not spending enough time doing the stuff that they love doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally agree. Totally agree. Um, I on that note, on the I have to, I should, I must, I'm a big believer in that and shifting that language. So rather than saying I have to, shift the language to I choose to. So if you find yourself in circumstances that are not conducive to achieving what it is that you want to achieve, it's I'm choosing to stay here to support my family, to whatever it is, rather than saying I have to stay in this job that I really hate because, and you're blaming external circumstances essentially. So if you take back the power internally, I think it's a huge shift. I'd never heard before that distinction of shifting the language, or sorry, at least recognizing the language when you say the difference between I have to versus I love doing XYZ. It was just not something I was aware of before. And I'm like, I'm like, oh, I hope I'm saying I love to do these things rather than I have to do these things now. So absolutely love that. And people living incongruently. One thing that I was going to say is, yeah, like society, I think at large values certain things, and we see what other people are doing. We aspire to that. We might get jealous or we might get envious, and then we want to replicate what they're doing. And I think oftentimes we arrive at where we think we want it to be, and we're looking around going, this doesn't really feel like I thought it would feel. I thought it would feel differently. I thought I would feel differently. I thought I would feel better for whatever reason. So I think that happens a lot. Any sort of examples to share around that, where that happens?
Um, yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of business owners, and one of the things that I see happen over and over again is when people achieve their goals. So, for
Yeah.
example, for a lot of business owners, they have a plan. It could be a 5 year plan, a 10 year plan, or whatever plan, and their goal is to exit the business. Sell
Yeah.
the business, let's say, and they have a big liquidity event, and a load of cash hits the account, and whatever, and within the following months, they're depressed,
Mm.
and they're depressed because, or they're having feelings of depression. If I'm going to sort of get really really particular on it, because I don't
Yeah.
believe that anybody has depression, they have feelings of depression, is that it's because all of a sudden they had an ideal of how they would like their life to be, which was this big fantasy. I'm going to sell the business. I'm going to feel amazing. I'm going to wake up every day looking forward to just doing nothing, and being able to have full freedom of my day. And if I want to go to the beach, go to the beach. If I want to go on holiday, only to realize that it's not what they thought it would be.
Mm.
And people have feelings of depression when they're comparing a fantasy to a reality, and the bigger the gap, the bigger the feelings of depression.
Yeah. And is that to do with, like, what springs to my mind in that situation is, on the one hand, it's the expectations, what we expected something to be like versus the reality of what it actually is. And I think it applies in a lot of different contexts and a lot of different circumstances where we expect one thing, and that is the one of the big drivers. I love that distinction of being depressed versus feelings of depression. I love that distinction that you've made. The other thing that struck me as well as you were talking was when someone sells their business and they have all of this free time and they've got loads of money, is it the sense of purpose maybe that's missing from that they
Yeah.
don't really have anything to do with their time anymore, and they're kind of missing that, the process, or the kind of, once the goal is attained, then it's like, okay, so what do I do now and what do I aim for? And they're maybe a little bit aimless.
Without a doubt, it's exactly that. Let's face it, the majority of the population are still conditioned to operate in accordance to the industrial age. You're going to start work, you're going to work for 50 years, and then you're going to retire, and then you get to do
Yeah.
what you want, right?
Mm.
And everything was designed in alignment. Even the whole schooling system, I mean, let's not go down that rabbit hole,
Yeah,
but
yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode.
yeah, it is indeed. But it was designed for that time, um, in in the way that we operated on the planet. We're in a different time now, and I think that um yeah, people do exactly that. People, they learn, they earn, then they yearn. And I think that, I mean, how many people do we know, I mean, not personally, but know of, that have spent their whole life working? They get to 65, they retire, and in the space of a year or two, their health deteriorates,
Mm.
and then they die.
Yeah.
You know, well, it's because they've not got their purpose. And then you take, on the other hand, um, the Japanese. There's a little island off of Japan called Okinawa, and they've got more centurions than anywhere else on the planet.
Yeah.
Why? Well, all other things being equal, diet and exercise and whatnot, they live by a concept called an ikigai, which is a reason for being. And an ikigai is made up of four components, and it's kind of the cross section of the four, which is: what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? And what can you be paid for? And you've got these 100-year-old people still working, but they're not working because people, oh my God, they're 100, they're still working. What a sad life to live.
Mm.
But they're loving what they're doing every day. They're
Yeah.
socializing. They're in and around. Like, I just I'm quite um funny with language, right? But
Mm.
even dabbling down the specific wording, I love to learn the etymology of certain words, where the root
Yeah.
origin
Yeah.
of them. But take the word retire.
Yeah.
Why the hell do I want to get more and more tired every day?
Yeah.
Retire.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I just that's not for me.
Yeah. Side note on the retire, I did. Um, I saw a meme there a few months ago. Or it might have been last year sometime, and they said they're like, "Oh, I'm retired." And then, yeah, the next slide was something like, "Yeah, I was tired yesterday, and I'm tired again today."
Yeah.
So I just love that as a concept. But brilliant. So this idea of purpose being really, really, really important for like the underlying, and I love the idea. Like I don't ever see myself retiring. For me, I want to do something that I enjoy so much that I want to continue doing it. I might work fewer hours, but I want to continue doing what it is and contributing and having an impact on the world that I want to have. Whereas I think, like you say, the majority of the population have this mentality that I'm going to be happy when I retire, and retirement might still be 20 or 30 years away. But you're kind of working and saving. I took a slightly different route in that I spent about 2.5 years traveling solo around the world at various different times. And people thought I was crazy. They're like, no one's seen a 29-year-old backpacker. Why are you going backpacking? I was like, as if 29 was too old. I've kind of missed the boat on that because I'm not in my early 20s or late teens anymore. But coming back to this idea of purpose, how do you think people can tap into that a little bit more and find their purpose?
I don't believe anybody finds a purpose.
Okay.
I don't believe people find. I believe people create it.
Okay. Yeah.
So and I think that's where a lot of people go, right, well, I'm going to go traveling around the world to find my purpose. Well, you're going to be traveling a long time,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's about creating it. And well, how do you create it? There's a few different techniques that I will use with people, and normally we tap into it. So there's a difference between having a North Star for me, which is the mission, and then the purpose, which is the why.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to talk about the purpose specifically, so one of the exercises that I get people to do, it's a very simple exercise, is they get a pen and paper, they draw out a bar graph. So they've got an x-axis and a y-axis. The axis at the bottom is time from the moment they were born until now, and the axis up the side is sort of +10. In the middle is 0, and it kind of goes 10, 9, 10, 8, 2, 1, and then it's -1 down to -10. And they
Mm-hmm.
just plot their their perception of life in according to experience. So their lowest lows, their highest highs, and they plot it. And then what we do is we look at the lowest lows and go, oh, what's the correlation here to the highest highs? Because in
Mm-hmm.
my experience, every lowest low is directly correlated to the highest high. And the great thing, if most recently, that in the most recent times, anybody that's listening to this that chooses to do that exercise, and they're in a real low right now, so they're at like a -10 or whatever the low might be for them. The great news is that it means that a new high is on the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Things
And
can only go up from here.
yeah, right, exactly. So it's being aware of that, and also it's making that correlation. So for me, I was living for many, many years, just making the money and doing it until that day I had that realization, wow, yeah, the lowest moment that I can remember was being 10 or 11 years old, and when everything went wrong with money and it was a real nightmare and there was arguing and all this stuff, and it was just like life changed as I knew it. Um, and I was like, I don't want people to go through that suffering. And that was it. And I knew. But for me, I stumbled across it.
Mm.
But now it's like we can scientifically work it out. And what I mean by scientifically is like there's a process. There's not a person on the planet that I haven't been able to crack it with. Um, not that I've worked with all 8 billion people yet, but
Not yet.
the people, yeah, exactly. But it is, and it's just a case of asking some of those questions. But that's one of the ways of doing it. Um, and we just look for patterns because that's really what I've done. I have all the people I've worked with over the years. I just look for the patterns,
Mm.
and human beings, whilst we might think that we're complex, there's only so many problems that you can have personally or professionally or financially, and then it's just the pattern. And as you
Mm.
said before, the habit, what's the activity that we're doing that's preceding that event, consciously or unconsciously, and that's the key part. I think there's a lot of people that are running patterns unconsciously, and they don't realize they're patterning it. They're running those patterns until the light shone on it, and then they
Mm.
go, "Wow, where did that come
Yeah.
from?" So I'll give you an example. So for as long as I can remember, when people, well, maybe people don't say it to you, but when I was a young lad growing up, people will often say, "So what's your type, Will? What's your type like in terms of the other of what I sort of fancied, I suppose? Are you a boobs guy? Are you a bum guy?"
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm eyes and smile actually. Yeah, big blue eyes and a nice smile, and yeah, that's it for me." And I just thought that was my thing. Um, and then one day, this is probably 7 years ago, 6 years ago, it just dawned on me, it's like, oh my God, oh my God. I remembered, and what I remembered, so the pattern that I would run in relationships would be that I would be with an amazing girl, normally big, beautiful eyes, big, beautiful smile, and I would screw it up in one way or another.
Mm.
Or I would be with a girl, beautiful eyes, beautiful smile, but like I just had to get away from them. They was it was not right, and the term that I would probably have used back then was they're a little bit crazy,
Mm.
and they went a bit crazy, right? So um that was for me, and then it dawned on me what happened was when I was about 6 years old, the love of my life at 6 years old, Kelly McCormack. She was an Australian, and yes, I've tried to find her on Facebook, and I can't find her. So Kelly, if you're listening to this, let me know. But no, Kelly McCormack, I was about 6 years old, sort of person you walk around the playground holding hands with and
Mm.
whatnot. Um, she was on Australia, and one day she just left. And I'm guessing her parents must have been like contractors over here or whatever. And one day she just moved back to Australia. And what had happened was that 6 year old me was hurt so bad that what I did was that if I found the version of Kate, the big beautiful eyes, big beautiful smile, was that I would pick the person that I knew I wouldn't be with long term, so I didn't get hurt,
Yeah.
or I would screw the relationship up so I didn't get hurt. And that was the pattern that I was running unconsciously for 20 years.
Yeah. 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 I think when you talk about patterns, like for me, it's the same stuff keeps happening again and again, and it kind of gets progressively worse as time goes on. And when I first started learning about this stuff, it was like these are it's here for a lesson, and if you don't address it now, it's just gonna
It
escalate
was.
until it
Have you?
really smacks you in the face, basically.
Well, have you heard of the feather, the brick, and the bus?
No, I haven't.
So I mean it's ironic talking about hitting you in the face. So the idea is that at any given time, the universe, if you want to call it that, for some people it's God, whatever it might be, will give you a lesson. The first lesson that they'll to course correct you will be a feather. So they'll just tickle you a little bit. If you ignore the feather, you'll get a brick in the face.
Yeah.
If you ignore the brick in the face, you get the bus.
Is
You
there
get hit by
anything
the
past the
bus.
bus?
Well,
Or is that the real wake up
yeah,
call?
that's the end exactly. That's the real
Yeah.
wake up call. So it's
Yeah.
like, are you listening?
Yeah.
which comes back to the whole living congruently thing. And I think living congruently is by being aware of our emotions. You know, they're there to give us our intuition. I think that for me, emotions are just a label we put on a feeling.
Yeah.
And look, I'll be the first to admit I've been a very heady person over the years, whereas like that's the tip of the iceberg. We've got a whole body, and for us to embody things at a cellular level. And I know there's a lot more research these days coming out about the gut brain and your head, your heart, and your gut, and what should you be doing and what should you be listening to. And I think that you shouldn't just listen to your body personally. I think that it's a combination of all three. And
Yeah.
um, I when your head, your heart, and your gut, sorry, when you're living congruently to your values, your head and your heart and your gut will say the same thing.
Yeah. I love that. And values is something, again, that had you asked me 6 years ago, I'd be like, I have no idea what my values are. I know what the company values are where I work. Those values don't resonate because they're not being lived in the organization. We're not seeing it's one of the one I always think of the is simple. They talked about a value of being simple, and it was the most bureaucratic organization I'd ever worked in. If you wanted to send out a marketing email, you had to get approval from one of two people in the States. So they're representing the entire global organization for approvals to send out a local email to local clients. So, I mean, it was anything but simple. But I went on to do a master's then in organizational behavior, and this concept of values came up again. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something behind this. I'm really interested. So, do you have any thoughts on how can people uncover what their values are, or kind of shift away from societal values or values that they see in other people, or values that have maybe been imposed on them by their caregivers, by their relations?
I absolutely do, and it's something. It's a big chapter in the book, because I was the same as you. I was hearing values everywhere, and
Yeah.
it for me it was all too ambiguous, right?
Mm.
And I haven't worked in big corporate, but like everybody says the same thing. Oh yeah, these things that are on the wall that we review once every 3 years or whatever it is, and there's some photos of them, I think, in reception maybe. It's like one of those sort of things. But
Mm.
one of my big things is taking complex stuff and making it simple so
Yeah.
that it's kind of universal. It can be universally applied. And the as time went on, I made some distinctions around values that I think people might find helpful, which are these. So, first of all, you've got what I call end values. So, end values are things that you move towards or away from, and they're typically feelings. So, I want to move towards connection, for example. Um, is just one example. And I want to move away from people might say guilt. Let's say, oh, I hate
Mm.
feeling guilty, so I want to be away from that. But then then you have your means values. So the means are is kind of the context of which the end values are achieved or avoided, and those means values are based on a process that I'll explain in a minute. But for example, the means values is the thing that you do. So most people, when they refer to values, they'll talk about um sort of societal ideals. So all things like, oh yeah, I value integrity and I value loyalty and I value peace, right? Which are bollocks. Because the reality of it is when you're in a situation that can't happen, you're willing to breach those things.
Yeah.
And the situation is what the means values are. Right. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's where we
It's
break down.
contextual. Is that what you mean?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's
So,
contextual. So,
so
so
I'm happy to take money if it means going against the company values, or if it's something a bit dodgy, or like, again, thinking back to my corporate days, move like one thing that was done regularly was moving money from January 2024 as an example into December 2023, so we hit our Q4 goals and we hit our year end goals.
exactly, right. And also, but then you look at some other situations, like, oh yeah, I'd never steal money. All right, okay. Well, if all of a sudden you found yourself in a situation where you were starving, you were homeless, and whatever else, and it's okay, like, then would you do it? oh well, yeah, but that's different. Well, is it different? And that's the so
Yeah.
it becomes a very interesting conversation. But the point being is that so you could have two people, they both value connection, but
Mm.
one person values connection with their friends, and another person values connection with their family. So it's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
thing that they're doing. Whereas
Yeah.
but then the person that values friendship with their family, it's not that they like being around people, it's who they're around, so
Yeah.
it's not the connection. But I remember when I was a kid, I was very fortunate for the majority of my childhood. We went on holiday every year. In the 6 weeks holiday, I used to see that this holiday of my family is this massive inconvenience that stopped me from being able to hang out with my friends for the full 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's which well, I mean, talk about such a. I mean, I was very young, but I was super privileged to go on holiday. But I didn't see it as that. I was like, yeah, but I want to be with my friends. Why do I have
Mm.
to come on holiday with the family and hang around with
Yeah.
my brother and sister that are 3 years younger than me, which obviously when you're a kid, three
It's a
years
huge
is like a
difference.
huge gap. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not hanging around with them and my sister that's 10 years younger than me. I'm cool. I want to skateboard. They can't even ride a bike. It's like and it's that kind of thing. So and how do you do it? Well, look, the best way that I've come across finding means values is the DeMartini value determination process. It's
Mm.
free. Go to drdemartini.com. You can do it. There's 13 questions, but I've refined that into a real quick way of doing it with people, which is looking at four things. So the acronym STEM, STEM, is looking at your space. So if you walked into my office, and for those of you that is this going out on YouTube as well? Are we getting
It
is the
is.
video going anywhere? Okay, great. So
Yeah.
people are watching on the YouTube, you can see that for people that aren't, you're just gonna have to take my word for it. But if you look behind me, there's trophies and there's books and there's everything in front of me. I've got a load more books and there's some the certificates and whatnot and awards. And so you could walk into my environment and you look on. I've got a big whiteboard there with a load of goals on the wall. So you walk in instantly just by being in my environment. You can get a sense of who I am. Now, even just the books. You look at the books; they're almost all business or self help. Whereas
Mm.
you might walk into a doctor's surgery. Yeah, there's loads of books, but they're all around medicine.
Yeah.
So you get a gauge of what someone values by their space. So hence the yes. Um, uh, so whereas I don't know, people might be listening to this. You go into their car and it's just full of golf gear. The golf clubs are in the back, the golf shoes are in the front. There's a load of balls, spare balls that have been bought from the recent shop that are just chucked on the back seat. So well, this person clearly values golf. As an example, the second one is time. So reviewing your time. Where do you spend your time? What are you actually doing? E is for energy. And it's not just what you expend your energy on, but it's what you get your energy from. So that's, I think, really interesting. So yesterday I did a 15-hour day. I had a meeting with a business partner from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. I had run my mastermind all day and went straight into a dinner that I ran with. We had 50 clients and friends. 15-hour day. I left that venue at 10 p.m. as energized as I was at 8 a.m. Yeah, it didn't completely suck the life out of me.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
there's other things that I can do for half an hour and it's drained my energy. And then the fourth one is money.
Mm.
What are you spending your money on? And it's more disposable income than anything else. What are you spending your disposable income? Because obviously people might have mortgages and bills to pay, whatever.
Yeah.
But what are you spending your disposable income on? Whereas for me, it's like I'm constantly buying books, I'm constantly buying courses, I'm
Mm.
buying things for like 2 weeks ago, I bought myself an ice bath. So because and the ice bath represent not because I value cold water per se, but I value um uh the personal development that is a tool for.
Yeah. 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 I would love that. Absolutely brilliant. And I had heard of that previously, like this, the idea of what is actually around you. Like that's how you spend your time. And I suppose one of the questions I have in relation to that is, what if it's not the right things? Does this go back to the incongruent piece? So you're surrounding yourself with stuff, or you're spending your money on stuff, but actually it's not giving you that sense of fulfillment. Is that linked with this feeling of incongruency then?
Uh, um, yes, ish. So um if somebody tells me, yeah, I really want to Yeah, I will. I really, really want to learn. I'm really. That's what I want to do this year. And then you go home and you look at what they're doing, and they spend all evening just sat there on Netflix watching the latest series.
Hmm.
Now, the space element is the reason why I say space is potentially different is because what you have today is a result of where you were, right? So
Okay,
everything
yeah,
that I
yeah,
have today is as a
yeah.
result of where I was. The
Hmm.
stuff that I'm doing now moving forward is based on where I'm going.
Yeah,
And I think that that's worth bearing in mind because somebody could have had a real significant shift in the like my office 8 years ago wasn't completely full of books and awards and certification and all the rest of it. It was based on the stuff that I'd had from years gone by.
yeah,
You know, like some of those trophies behind me are from when I played ice hockey,
yeah,
right? Which are also, whereas some of my more recent awards are from coaching. Like last year, I won the Business Enabler Award, and so it's different based on the time lag. So yeah, I because I'm always sort of sense checking myself. Is that completely true? And would I ever disagree with that? And that's the only time I disagree with it. Is just
yeah,
knowing that the seeds that you're sowing today that
yeah.
you're gonna reap in
That
in
makes, I think that
time.
makes sense what you're talking about. Will, this idea that what you have now is a result of what you've done up to this point, and maybe you've had a shift in mindset over the last year, months, whatever it might be, but it's taking time for that to kind of materialize into your space or into, you know, your time or whatever that might be. But presumably your time and your money you're spending on the stuff that you're moving towards as opposed to the stuff that you're moving away from.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. And the there was something you just said that I thought that was a really good example of that, but it is floating away out of my head, so I can't remember what it is now. But yeah, it was along those lines in terms of yeah, habits. When we were talking earlier about habits, you were saying about the
Yeah,
goal of the habit. Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for focus on the process, and that's the big part of North Star thinking, right? If you have a goal that's so big you accept you're never going to achieve, then you can detach from the outcome and you can focus on the process.
yeah,
You fall in love with the process, and then you don't have to worry about the sort of getting to the destination.
mm,
But at the moment, I'm on a bit of I'm sure many people are in January on a bit of a health and fitness kick. And whilst I might look at the scales today, my weight today is not because I've eaten clean for the last 11 days. It's
mm,
because of years worth. Whereas what I see on the scales in 3 months, I could in 3 months' time, I might be the perfect weight, exactly how I want to be, and all the rest of it. And that morning, I could eat loads of ice cream, loads of chocolate, loads of sweets. It's not gonna necessarily show up on the scales that day,
yeah,
and I'm not gonna look in the mirror that day and go, oh my God, I've just put on 10% body fat because of doing those actions. It's
yeah,
the compounded effort of
yeah.
weeks and months
I
at
think it's
play.
a really nice analogy to use. It's showing, like you say, the compounded effect of all of the stuff that you do over time. It's not just this one thing that's going to make a difference, but it's the habits and the process that you go through rather than just one-off things, which I think people this is what people see a lot of the time. Like one person had one thing happen and they had overnight success, but actually that's not the reality whatsoever. Will, it's been absolutely brilliant chatting with you. Any final thoughts in relation to insights from the book to share before we wrap things up?
No, I mean, no, I think we've covered it. We've got obviously there's only so much we can do in terms of surface level at the day, but if
Yeah,
people are intrigued, then please go and grab a copy and check it out. There's a lot that we cover in a very short 200 odd pages or whatever it is. So
yeah,
yeah, we cover a lot of ground on everything from sort of that your North Star to mastering your time to evolving your thinking to creating habits that stick. We cover all of those in detail in the book.
brilliant. Yeah, I look forward to getting a copy myself. So thank you. The other thing and the question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
A great question. Have you heard of Elle Nightingale?
The name doesn't ring a bell. No.
So Earl Nightingale, he's got a very famous audio, 30-minute audio, called "The Strangest Secret." Earl Nightingale was mentored by Napoleon Hill, who a lot of people know, who wrote the book Think and Grow Rich. And yesterday I was reading, um, I reread the book and listened to the audio, and there was a guy whose name I can't remember, and they defined success, and it said success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So for me, being um happy, um for me is very much that, is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And I also believe that happiness is equal to or greater than your expectations. So that what's your expectation of it? So for me, I'm bringing both those elements together, because your happiness is equal to or greater than your expectations. But the if your expectation is of a worthy ideal that you're constantly progressing towards,
Mm.
then you've got both of those married together.
Yeah, love that. And it ties in very nicely with your book, I have to say as well. I think this whole concept of what we've been talking about throughout our conversation. So, if people want to connect with you, if they want to get their hands on your book, if you have any events coming up, what's the best place that they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Will Polston, on all the socials, you can jump in there. There's willpolston.com. The podcast, Make It Happen with Will Polston, if you're interested in kind of where we're at there. And then the book, for most people, the quickest way of getting it is just Amazon, and jumping on Amazon, and you get it within the day or whatever it is from Amazon. But yeah, there's a few bookstores that you can get it from. You can go on Waterstones and whatnot. But yeah, that's normally the best place for most people around the world.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed the conversation today, and I'm sure listeners are going to take so much away from it as well.
No, thank you. Really enjoyed it.